Okay, so I'm a little late, but I have just now seen the new Robert Eggers film, Nosferatu, starring Lily Rose Depp, Nicholas Hoult, and Bill Skarsgård. And it was good. It was really good, I think. This is going to be a difficult review because this is going to be one of those movies where really time will tell and maybe a couple more rewatches are going to be needed for me to fully understand how I feel about the film. But for this being my first impression, I am still confident right now in how I feel about this film overall. So Nosferatu is a gothic horror film about a vampire obsessed with this young woman, terrifying monster haunting her, her husband, and the town that they reside in. For any of those who are unaware, this is a remake of the 1922 original of the same name, directed by F.W. Murnau, which I have seen. I have not seen the other remake, the Werner Herzog Nosferatu, I believe 1979, and I am a fan of Herzog, so I'll watch that one eventually. Now this new remake, the 2024 version, it does stay very faithful to the original in terms of plot. So let's talk about the original first real quick, but as always, no spoilers for either film. I did like the 1922 version. I didn't necessarily find it scary, but I still enjoyed it and found aspects of it I can really appreciate and admire. Me being a huge fanboy of cinema as a whole, I do find it easy to immerse myself into these older films quite naturally, despite there being a difference in style of acting compared to modern times, or even special effects or musical scores, which I know most people struggle to do. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of people's opinions on movies in general are, hey, if the movie came out 30 years before I was born, waste of time, too old, I know I won't like it. Which, even though I don't share that opinion, for reasons I won't get into right now, it is understandable. Unfortunate, but understandable. And when I say it's easy for me to watch and get into these older films quite naturally, I'm thinking older films like the 50s, the 40s. Nosferatu, the original, came out in 1922. This is a silent film. There's no audio. The version I watched literally just has a musical score the entire runtime. So where it's easy for me to recommend movies like Citizen Kane, Seven Samurai, Psycho, movies that are older but I would genuinely think most people today would actually enjoy them if they gave them a chance and sat down and watched them, I don't think most people nowadays would be doing backflips for the original Nosferatu. It is a little slow by today's standards, and for the horror, it's not really all that scary. Again, this movie is 100 years old. Me personally, I did enjoy the artistic imagery of it. It really does capture a great, strong sense of mood. 100-year-old film, and I think it's genuinely still beautiful to look at. It's got a great gothic look, and there are a few shots of Count Orlok that are genuinely eerie, like with him standing or with him walking. He has this tall, lengthy size and this wide-eyed, uncompromising look. It's pretty creepy. In fact, I saw something on Twitter where someone said they watched the movie on mute with no musical score, and it really adds to the sense of eeriness. Thinking about it like that, I should have watched the movie like that. Whatever, I still enjoyed it. It's creative, it's bold. Even though there are a few eerie images, I wouldn't classify it as necessarily scary, but then again, it came out a century ago. The question is this new Robert Eggers version scary? I don't think so. There's like 2 jump scares that are great in this remake. I don't like my horror with jump scares. I'd rather, or should I say, I don't like an oversaturation of jump scares in my horror, where it becomes very predictable and thereby annoying. Thankfully, this movie isn't that. But that eerie sense of dread that creeped us out and unnerved us, that feeling of terror we got from the other Robert Eggers films like The Witch or The Lighthouse, that's not here in this movie. And I understand this is a remake of a gothic horror film. This is not a slow burn psychological horror that he's trying to make like the others, but I can't help but still feel a little disappointed by the horror aspect of this horror movie. It's not amateur, but it does feel a bit weak, especially compared to what Eggers has done in the horror genre before. However, a horror movie not giving me instant nightmares does not make the movie dog shit as a whole. Let's talk about the rest of the film, the good and the bad. This remake is essentially the same story on paper as the original, but Robert Eggers does add some dialogue choices and story beats and enough characterization for this to feel like his own version. But I don't know if the vision is strong enough here to merit its existence. Don't get me wrong, it is well shot, the cinematography is consistent in terms of shot composition and framing. There is an overall gray color palette to it. I'm usually not a fan of movies when they go that route, but Robert Eggers, I think, seems to know how to effectively use it in creating a dreary, dark atmosphere without actually making the film look dull or lifeless. That being said, I think this is still my least favorite looking Eggers film out of his main four. It doesn't make it ugly, I just hold his films to a very high standard. I am a big fan of his. Seems the cinematography was getting better and better with every release, but this one I would say is probably my least favorite. There's only a few shots where I was thinking, wow, that's beautiful. No spoilers, but the shot of a man walking down this long snowy road surrounded by trees and fog and snow and moonlight, that is easily the best shot in the film. That is beautiful. The costumes and set pieces, like every other Eggers film, top tier. You can always tell he has a keen attention to detail in terms of setting and world building. And I'm not a historian, but I've heard on multiple occasions that he is very accurate to the time periods his movies take place in. Not just clothes and props and makeup, but also the dialogue and the way he has his characters speak to each other. It's apparently very realistic and historically accurate, which really does help the overall mood and immersing us, the audience, into his stories, into his movies. Side note, that was extremely prevalent in The Lighthouse. I had to watch that movie with subtitles, which is not a diss. That was awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the acting. Bill Skarsgård has an argument for the best performance of 2024 easily. He transformed into Count Orlok. There's not a whiff of him there. Bro's a chameleon. And it's not just because of the very good makeup and costume work. He literally, I don't know how he did that. It doesn't even sound like him. His voice is this deep, haunting. He sounds like a vampire, like a literal vampire, not some Mickey Mouse Twilight bullshit. I'm talking about if you actually imagined a corpse-like monster, what it would sound like. It would probably sound like whatever the fuck Bill Skarsgård did in this movie. Perfectly finds the balance of cliche and realism, and it's legitimately, I'm gonna sound corny, it's beautiful to listen to. Props to him because his performance literally mesmerizing. Everyone else was good too. Moving on. No, I'm not trying to downplay them. Lily Rose Depp, she was very strong in this movie. She had to pull off a couple insane moments herself, and she does stick the landing in a very memorable performance as Ellen. Same with Nicholas Hoult as Thomas. Nicholas Hoult, side note, has been on one of the craziest, most underrated runs, I would say, of 2024, if not the best run an actor has done. Nosferatu, Juror 2, The Order, extremely underrated movie that I will be talking about in my top 10 favorites of 2024. Those are the ones I could think of off the top of my head. There may have been a few others that I missed, but regardless, fantastic run, and he's also fantastic in this movie. But let's talk about the most debated performance I've seen people have discussions and arguments about, on Twitter at least, and that is the performance of Aaron Taylor Johnson. I liked Aaron in this role. I think he brought a charm and an energy that sometimes doesn't blend in too smoothly with the rest of the cast or where the story's at. There were a few moments in line deliveries where I was like, huh? Why'd he do that? But I do think as the movie went on, he did get better. I think what he was doing with the character felt more in tune with the second and final act rather than the first. There were a few moments where I did feel a bit iffy and he did sort of stick out like a sore thumb, but overall I do think he pulled off a solid and welcomed performance. In general, the aspects of good filmmaking are here, but the story itself just feels a bit dry. I think I understand what the point of this version was. There are a few subtle and non-subtle moments where you can understand, oh, so that's what he's trying to say with these characters. But the story, even though the characterization and the dialogue was an improvement compared to the original, or at least they were solid modifications for today's audiences, it didn't feel as captivating as I think it was trying to be, or what it should have been. The movie wasn't boring. These are relatively minor critiques in the grand scheme of things, but I will say the movie at points did feel like it slowed down. But overall, I did enjoy Nosferatu 2024. In time, after a few more rewatches, I'll be able to have a more concrete understanding on how I feel about the pros and the cons. But I know in general, I did like it. It's probably my least favorite Eggers film, but again, that's because I hold the other ones to a very high standard. They're truly fantastic in every way. In fact, for the similar recommendation, it's going to be a Robert Eggers film. But for right now, I'm giving Nosferatu a 7 out of 10, and yes, I would recommend it. It was a solid movie, and as always, I am excited for his next project, whatever it'll be. Now for the similar recommendation, I could say Interview with a Vampire or Bram Stoker's Dracula, but I want to show some love to Robert Eggers' previous work, specifically his directorial debut, and that is of course The Witch from 2015, directed by Robert Eggers, starring Anya Taylor-Johnson and Ralph Ineson. In The Witch, we are following a family in the 1600s, I believe the 1630s, and they recently just got kicked out of their settlement or colony, and they're forced to live by themselves in the woods. Except they're not by themselves, there's a fucking witch there, and it is terrifying. This is a folklore psychological horror film, and I remember first watching this when I was a teenager with my family, and at the time I didn't scare easy, and now I definitely don't scare easy. But I will always remember this experience because this was the first movie that I remember truly just terrifying the shit out of me. This movie would easily go in the S tier if we're ranking purely psychological horror films. This is a huge pioneer in the genre, and I feel like Hereditary gets all the credit for that. But The Witch came out 3 years prior, and even before that, I believe a year before, The Babadook came out. It was really this and The Babadook that really started this type of horror craze that we're getting so much today. Even then, with all the horror movies that have been coming out from Neon or A24, none of them have really topped The Witch. Call me corny or a bitch, the first time I saw this movie, I genuinely thought I was seeing some evil shit. This was back in the time when I was like an edgy little atheist at the time, so, you know, that's saying something. To make me feel so uncomfortable and creeped out talking about all this devil shit and, hey, who's this Black Phillip guy? Chill out. Beautifully shot, haunting score, wonderfully acted, and genuinely terrifying. It's a slow burn terrifying. It's not a jump scare festival like Insidious, but if you stick around, by the end, you'll just feel so uneased and creeped out, you'll just be scared even though nothing's necessarily popping out at you. It doesn't have the romance drama angle like this new Nosferatu film, but the reason why this is the similar recommendation is because, one, obviously same director, but two, I wanted to point out another horror movie that this director did that I think is genuinely scary. One of the best feature debuts of the 2010s, which I believe is saying something. Solid slow burn, horrifying. If you have the patience for it, watch it. Alright, that does it for my review. I will probably still, even though it is a little late, I'll probably still put out a Baby Girl and a Complete Unknown review. But I've definitely been working on my top 10 best movies of 2024. That obviously has been taking some time. I believe I've hit about over 60 movies from that year. So expect that video to come out within the next 2 weeks, hopefully within the next week. I'm very excited for this year. This is going to be a great year for movies, a great year for the channel. I'm also working on a movies I'm most excited for in 2025 video, so that'll also be out hopefully again within 2 weeks. Alright, thank you to everybody who watched, and I'll see you at the next one.